Why is childhood obesity not seen, recognized as negligence, abuse? It's generally seen as not great socially. But legally we also give a very wide leeway in letting parents parent how they see fit. The bar for the state to interfere in child welfare is high. That isn't unique to this situation. Applies to other neglectful or similar situations as well. Not saying this applies for everyone. But the food options available to low-income people are insanely unhealthy. Where I live, it's cheaper to buy a combo from McDonald's for every meal for the entire week than it is to buy healthy, nutritious groceries for 3 days. That's not to mention how overworked the lower class is. How can you be expected to create a healthy, diverse, and adapted diet for your child when you work 2 jobs, 12 hours a day? What about the fact many of them suffer from physical, mental health issues they can't afford to treat? It's a very complex situation. And the solution isn't to judge people you've never met before, but to be empathetic of others' struggles. In my case, my dad literally just didn't know any better. I don't think he ever thought he was hurting us by making it an after-school routine to get a Slurpee and a candy bar. He worked a lot and didn't cook, so we always ate at buffets and fast food restaurants. Late night eating was normal. He stayed up until 23 a.m. every night. But he grew up very poor. And his parents didn't know how to teach him to be healthy, so he didn't know how to teach us. I suffered a lot for it and still do, trying to undo bad habits that were instilled 20 years ago. But I wouldn't say he deserved to be charged with abuse or neglect. He was just severely undereducated about what it means to keep your children healthy. Well, the school system apparently does not teach anyone how to live healthy, and the moment Michelle Obama tried to get schools to feed healthy food to students and teach students how to eat healthy, the right-wing nutjobs all screeched about how she was forcing people to eat healthy and was planning to remove all unhealthy foods from existence. I was overweight as a kid, and my parents, especially my father, were very sensitive to the imagined parents hamming when I was out in public. He even said as much when he told me that people in general thought less of him because I was fat. So for that, I had to deal with years of humiliation and verbal abuse. He would yell at me just for drinking 1 soda a week or having 1 piece of candy. Sometimes he would randomly hold up my hands and loudly exclaim how fat and ugly my fingers were. You seem to feel pretty superior when you see fat children. I have to wonder, do you actually believe your smugness is productive or beneficial to society as a whole? Or do you secretly know you don't actually care about children's health? Did you make a post in our Change My View on this topic recently? In short, there are a myriad of factors that contribute to obesity, and a number of them are simply out of control of the parent. So to just de facto label parents as negligent for childhood obesity is just not necessarily accurate. That's not to say there aren't negligent parents in this respect. Just shouldn't assume it off the bat. So what's your goal here? You want to take all the fat kids away from their parents? Who's gonna watch them then? You think they'll get a better life in foster care and group homes? Fact is, governments are pretty lenient on allow parents to parent, for the simple fact that there isn't much of an alternative. Charge parents with neglect or abuse and take the kids away. Now raising the kids is the government's problem. The government has to feed and house them. That's an expense governments are hesitant to take on. That's why parents will only ever be charged in the most extreme circumstances. There really isn't a better option. Taking happy, well-loved, well-supported kids away from their parents just because they give them a few too many treats is just never going to happen. What does happen is the government and society actively try to encourage and educate about healthy lifestyles. But this will never be 100% effective. The reality for many parents is that they would like to be healthier or more active with their kids, but they just don't have the time, energy, or money. This isn't the 1950s where most homes had a parent at home able to prepare healthy meals. Modern parents are overworked, exhausted, and financially stretched thin. When literally everything on the store shelves is calorically dense and nutritionally empty, and that's all you can afford, what other choice is there? Parents are morally and legally obligated to feed their children. There's never a situation where you have to hit your child, or leave them home alone, or give them illegal drugs. But you absolutely do have to feed them. You're allowed to think they're feeding their kids the wrong foods or too much of them. But it's a stretch to call it abuse to meet a basic obligation of parenthood. Furthermore, obese people have a feedback loop happening in their bodies in the form of leptin resistance, which means that once people become a little overweight, the hormones in their bodies that are supposed to regulate whether they feel hungry or not stop working correctly, and they receive hunger signals whether they need calories or not. After that starts, pounds pile on. How easy would it be for you as a parent to ignore your child crying to you for food because they felt hungry, even if you knew intellectually that they'd had enough to eat? No parent is perfect. Consider that when you see a fat child on a trampoline. That's all you see. A fat child on a trampoline. You don't know if that child is getting good grades. You don't know whether that family prioritizes quality family time, and spends evenings reading or playing board games together, or otherwise fostering close and loving relationships. You don't even know if that kid is involved in sports, since being active and being fat aren't mutually exclusive. All you're doing is drawing conclusions because of one thing you see without context. A child whose body you feel justified in judging. In that same park, there could be a kid covered in bruises under their clothes from their parent who beats them. Or a kid suffering from untreated mental illness because their parents don't believe in therapy. Or a kid who's raising their little siblings because their parents are never home. It isn't ideal to feed a child in a way that allows them to become obese. But it's also unfair to fixate on this specific thing because it's easier to see than other forms of bad parenting. I say keep in mind that even if we all ate the exact same foods every day, we'd all still look different. I've also noticed that right before puberty, kids tend to put on a bit of weight before they have their growth spurts. Hormones have quite an influence on how our bodies store weight. It's an issue, but more about where the limited resources are. They're not going to put time and effort into well-fed children when there's kids out there starving. Children are very, very influenced by others. It's extremely important that as adults we don't push children towards eating disorders and obsession. I would check your fat phobia, though I don't really know what's shocking about a child drinking a can of juice and having a donut when they're out. They're out. How do you know that that donut is the one treat they get a week because they're a low-income family? Maybe they don't get buckets of toys and days out, and instead at the weekend the parent can get 3 for $2 on donuts or something. Only judge and have opinions when you know. Otherwise you're going to make a complete fool of yourself one day for assuming you know what's happening to someone. Yes, you're in the wrong. You're making judgments based on brief observations. You know nothing about these children's or parents' lives. That's generally not a good position to pass judgment. Because weight is not always controllable, not even in children. It really depends on the context. It's not like parents are forcing their kids to eat junk food. They most likely teach them the same food habits they had when they were kids. Maybe they don't have time to cook. Maybe the parents are divorced and the kids eat healthy at one parent's house and unhealthy at the others. If we recognize it as abuse, we would also have to take the kids away from their parents, and that will only make the problem worse. Well, it's hard. Most of the time, people have significant weight issues when they have health problems like thyroid, diabetes, mental health, cancer, and many others. For example, if a child is severely underweight due to cancer treatment, you wouldn't report that as abuse since the parents are clearly helping their child. The same would go for an overweight child whose parents are actively seeking treatment for their child. Now there's also plenty of people who struggle with weight due to an eating disorder. Eating disorders are often a symptom of being in an abusive household or significant mental health problem, like severe OCD and severe autism. Unfortunately, for a lot of eating disorders and abuse, it's hard to diagnose visually. You'd have to know the child as a patient to really know if there is abuse. Emotional abuse doesn't usually get the same kind of attention as physical abuse since the physical evidence is pretty sparse. Anyways, my point is, it's the kind of thing that is too hard to identify visually as abuse. Nuance. Some kids just be fat FR. There is a lot to unpack here. Buckle up. Do you have children? In some cases you are correct. Parents allow kids to make poor choices as it pertains to diet and exercise. Children deal with medical issues, bullying, low self-esteem, abuse, all of them. Parents that are unwell, and the list goes on. So where do we start? You're just a mental judge. So okay, first off, let's envision a world where this does exist. Where is the bar set for the obese child? If he just ate a full meal at Thanksgiving and someone notices his stomach sticking out, then what? You call the police because a kid looks fat. The police grill the mother only for them to find the kid has a thyroid problem, or simply something to do with their metabolism, which is extremely common, might I add. Secondly, as others have added, it's more affordable to be unhealthy than it is to be slim, so know a lot of lower income families have the means of providing balanced meals for their children. Plus, if this is all they have, do you think the kid deserves to not eat? Should the kid start intense exercise training at like 6? Even though it's extremely discouraged to let children begin hard exercise programs so young. While I understand wanting to help, as someone who was abused as a child, the system failed to save me from that. The amount of manpower and resources to investigate every child on the higher end of a BMI scale, and the reasoning it would primarily punish poor, impoverished families makes this a horrible idea. Beyond that, a law like that would shine a light on obese people. Well, isn't this just self-harm? They are actively hurting themselves, so we should treat them like suicidal patients and force them into a mental health clinic. They can't afford to right their eating habits because their body makes me uncomfortable. The solution, I believe, is simply a better education system, community outreach programs, because obesity is an epidemic, and while medicine has indeed held a fat bias in history, there are people all over the online space kidding themselves into thinking their body is healthy while being like 300 pounds. As someone who struggled their whole life with obesity, I wish my parents had taken action to teach me a healthy lifestyle. Being fit now really makes it sink in how much better my childhood would have been. Kids need guidance and rules about nutrition and activity.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Ericast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.